on the World War I unit, and this is why the U.S. enters World War I. Let's start with the question, I think, why do nations go to war? Beginning of the 1900s saw the start of a half-century-long global conflict. This would encompass both World War I and World War II. World War I saw 10.8 million soldiers killed, 2.2 million civilians killed, 20 million people wounded, and 5.3 million civilian deaths due to war-related famine and disease. And to put those numbers in a little bit of perspective, there are about 3.2 million people in the state of Iowa total. World War II, though, really, we got much better at killing people by the Second World War. There were 25.5 million soldiers killed, 30.5 million civilians killed, and 28 million civilian deaths due to war-related famine and disease. Together, there was a massive loss of humanity during the First and Second World War, which encompasses the first 50 years of the 1900s. So there are four main causes of World War I: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. Militarism is a policy of aggressive military preparedness. Alliance refers to the fact that just before World War I, the great powers of Europe split into two main teams: the Triple Alliance, which would be Austria, Hungary, Germany, and Italy, and the Triple Entente, Britain, France, and Russia. Imperialism, we've already studied this concept. It's the actions used by one nation to exercise political or economic control over a smaller or weaker nation. And nationalism is a loyalty and devotion to a nation. So how exactly did World War I begin? I'll give you a hint. Spoiler alert. It involves these two people, the woman and the man, in their fancy clothing, getting into this car. In fact, the reason for the trigger, that spark that caused it, would be right after this picture was taken, shortly after. So let's first look at the cast of characters involved in World War I. We have Germany, France, Russia, Great Britain, Austria. These are the people who were involved in the beginning of as the war begins. So we have to kind of go back to 1861 and the Unification of Germany, when King Wilhelm becomes King of Prussia and appoints this guy, Otto von Bismarck, as the Chancellor. Bismarck started what is known as the blood and iron policy. The position of Prussia in Germany will not be determined by its liberalism, but by its power, he said. Not through speeches and majority decisions will the great questions of the day be decided, but by iron and blood. So he's telling the world that Germany is prepared to fight for what it wants. The Franco-Prussian War, and that Franco-Prussia refers to France and Germany. France forced to sign a humiliating treaty, because they lost the war, that ends the Franco-Prussian War. And France gave up most of its traditionally German regions in the Alsace-Lorraine. That's pictured in red there, on the eastern boundary of France. 1871 saw the unification of Germany, where Bismarck completes efforts to unify Prussia and the German kingdoms into a single nation. At the same time this is going on, we have changes in Russia. Nicholas is crowned Tsar Nicholas II of Russia in 1894. This is a position he did not want. He did not want to be leader of Russia. Germany and Russia do not renew a friendship treaty. It's like Russia unfriends Germany on Facebook. There is the Russo-Japanese War. This is a war between Russia and Japan in 1904-05, and it was a disastrous defeat for Russia and caused major civil unrest in Russia. Countries don't like it. The people in a country don't like it when their government goes to war and loses. And that led to a lot of protests in Russia, and it led to what's known as Bloody Sunday Massacre on January 22nd of 1905. And this picture is taken right before what I'm going to describe happened. Government troops in St. Petersburg kill 1,000 unarmed protesters. Nicholas II support among the workers and farmers is severely reduced. People didn't like the fact the government sent the military in and killed 1,000 unarmed people. And while this is going on, there's changes in Great Britain. Queen Victoria, whose bloodline runs through most of the ruling houses of Europe, in other words, she's related to many of the rulers, she dies in 1901 after having been queen for decades. And Victoria's eldest son, Edward VII, becomes king. Well, unlike his mom, he wasn't quite as skillful in foreign policy. He signs a treaty pledging military support with France and Russia. This would prove to be a problem. While we have this going on, we have this rise of militarism among European leaders. As European countries believed that disputes would ultimately be settled on the battlefield. We're not going to negotiate, we're going to be willing to fight for it. And European countries engage in an arms race. They start building more and more weapons. European countries try to develop larger armies and more powerful weapons. Britain lost its first dreadnought-class battleship, pictured here. This started an arms race between England and Germany, and eventually countries all around the world. I also listed here in red this fact that it consumed a huge amount of resources to build all these weapons and these giant ships and cannons and whatnot. So we have these alliances formed. The Triple Entente would be Russia, France, Britain, and the Triple Alliance we have Italy, Austria-Hungary, Germany, and Ottoman Empire, and they're all kind of tied together, the two sides. And all these countries have embraced a policy of militarism, and they all have gotten involved in this arms race. And we have a bunch of new leaders coming to the forefront, some of them who didn't want to be leaders. So we have kind of this perfect storm brewing. The Allied powers would be Britain, France, and Russia, and Italy remains neutral until 1915, and then they joined the Allies. The Central Powers during the war was Germany, Austria-Hungary, Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. So in this tinderbox, this potential explosive thing, we have the Balkan Wars starting up. And the Balkans are this area that you're looking at here. There's pictured as Bulgaria and Serbia and Bosnia and all these areas just north of Greece and north of the Aegean Sea. The Balkan Wars were two conflicts that took place in the Balkan Peninsula in 1912 and 1913. Bulgaria, Greece, Montenegro, and Serbia gained independence from the Ottoman Empire. Ottoman Empire, pictured on the map on the far right, had controlled this area, and they get independence. Austria-Hungary was weakened as a much enlarged Serbia pushed for a union of South Slavic peoples, where Serbia wanted to control these areas. Austria-Hungary wanted a port on the Adriatic Sea. Adriatic Sea, pictured here just kind of in where the green area is. They wanted a port there. For their navy. Austria-Hungary had internal problems with large Slavic population, and they didn't like Austrian control. They didn't like Austria telling them what to do. So Austria-Hungary considered Serbia an enemy because they both wanted to control Bosnia, which was then controlled by Austria, and Serbia was an ally of Russia. So we've got Russia siding with Serbia, pictured in green in the lower right corner, and then next to Serbia would be Bosnia, pictured in red, and both Austria and Serbia want to control Bosnia. So this resistance to Austrian imperialism, several groups formed to fight Austrian imperialism in the Balkans and liberate Bosnia. And the four groups listed there, and we're going to focus on the Black Hand, the last one listed. 3 assassins were sent to murder the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was the heir to the throne. He was going to be the next leader of Austria-Hungary when he visited Sarajevo. And the assassins were equipped with 4 revolvers, 4 handguns, 6 bombs, and cyanide tablets. And cyanide tablets are important because they're meant to commit suicide. If you get caught, you're not coming home. You're supposed to commit suicide. Gavrilo Princip was one of the 3 terrorists sent to kill Archduke Ferdinand. And he kind of fit the profile of someone who would be involved in such things. He was young, he was somewhat educated, and he was enough of a have-not to be shocked by the occupiers, in this case Austria-Hungary, of his homeland. He resented these imperialists coming in and taking him over. He wanted, by his own words, quote, unification by whatever means necessary, by means of terror, if necessary. He wanted to do away with those who obstruct and do evil and stand in the way of unification of this Slavic people. So Archduke Franz Ferdinand, pictured with his wife here, chose to visit Sarajevo on the anniversary of the 14th century Battle of Kosovo. And it's one of the most important days on the calendar of Serbian nationalism, known as St. Vitus Day. Archduke deciding to visit that time was symbolic to kind of stick it to Serbia, saying, look who really controls the country. And the heir to the throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and his wife were killed in Sarajevo on that day. Interestingly enough, the attempt to kill him at first failed. They had the terrorists had thrown a bomb, and it exploded near the car, and the driver raced away, and the attempt was seen to be as a failure. And Princip, one of this guy, went in figuring that he had failed, went in to get something to eat at a restaurant. And when he comes out, who does he see drive by in the car but none other than Ferdinand and his wife, and he takes out his gun and he shoots them both. So that was on June 28th. Now, just a couple side notes about Princip, what happened to him. He actually takes his cyanide capsule and to kill himself, only it was old and inert and didn't work, and all it did was kind of make him sick. He gets taken to prison, and he actually dies of pneumonia before he can actually go to trial. He died of an illness. 1 month later, the Archduke's father, Emperor Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary, declares war on Serbia for this murder, but it took him a month to get to that point. The instant that happened, well, not exactly instant, 3 days later, Russia joins the war as an ally of Serbia. So they start to mobilize their army. And because Russia said they're going to attack Serbia, Russia's going to join Serbia to attack Austria, Germany, who was friends with Austria, mobilizes her military and declares war on Russia. You attack my friend, I'm going to attack you. So we have Serbia. We have Serbian terrorists killing the Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. We have the Archduke of Austria declaring war on Serbia. We have Serbia's friend Russia declaring war on Austria. And we have Austria's friend declaring war on Russia, Germany that is. And because Russia and France were in alliance together, Germany declares war on France. But remember, if this seems a little silly, all this declaring of war, remember the policy of militarism, and in particular Bismarck's policy of blood and iron. The feeling was that we're going to settle these issues on the battlefield. I don't like France anyway, so let's just go to war. On August 4th, 1914, Germany declares war on Belgium, which was neutral, and invades Belgium, pictured here, in a move designed to defeat France quickly. And as a result of this invasion, Great Britain declares war on Germany. Finally, Austria declares war on Russia. While all this is going on, the U.S. was neutral, and the president of the time, Woodrow Wilson, America should be impartial in thoughts as well as in action. So in 1914, we were neutral. Most Americans agreed with that position. We didn't want any part of that war in Europe. However, those countries wanted us involved because we were this big, powerful nation at the time. Both the Allied powers and Central powers used propaganda to sway American public opinion. German propaganda was aimed at anti-Russian and focused on Russian autocracy and anti-Semitism, which means anti-Jewish feelings. And German propaganda, pictured here, another example pictured here, was most effective with German Americans and Irish Americans. And we also see another example of German propaganda, this idea of this race meme. That is this idea that some people aren't really human and it's okay to kill them, and they're pictured as being not really human. There's also anti-German propaganda. This is focused on German atrocities, especially in Belgium and France. And the German army did do lots of terrible things to civilians in Belgium. And it pictured here, he says the savage beast is hungry. Again, this race meme idea where now the Germans were portrayed as not really human, but rather animals that needed to be killed. Britain controlled the North Atlantic, and this is going to impact our overseas trade. Britain refused to allow American goods to be shipped to Germany. Well, for an obvious reason, because they were at war with Germany. And Britain would seize American ships. President Wilson protested, but he did not act against them, in large part because he actually sided with England. American trade with Germany dropped off dramatically between 1914 and 1916. This is important because it starts to be the separating of ways between Germany and America, and it was deciding which side we were going to come down on in the war. Another piece to this was that Germany established a submarine war zone around the British Isles. Germany had really the only effective submarines at the time, and they were very effective at sinking Allied ships. They had developed the U-boat, the submarine, and it allowed Germany to attack ships without any warning. In March of 1915, Germany sank the British ship Falaba, killing one American, and this made many Americans very angry at Germany. Germany sank the American oil tanker Gulf Flight, and 2 more Americans were killed. And it's pictured here. You could see the hole that was blown on the side of the ship with the torpedo. So for the first 6 months of 1915, German U-boats destroyed more than 90 ships. This is a picture inside the U-boat. In May of 1915, the German U-boat attacked the British passenger liner Lusitania. It was traveling from New York to Liverpool, England, with 1,960 people on board. Now, it's important here, though, that you know something. England was transporting people from New York to England, but also in the ship, there were weapons on board. The ship was attacked and sank, and 1,192 people were killed, including 128 Americans. But I want to go back to this idea of the Lusitania being sunk by the Germans. Germany had taken out an ad in the New York newspaper before the Lusitania had sailed, saying, "Do not get on the ship. If we see it, we will sink it," because they're transporting weapons. England denied having weapons on board on the ship, but there was ammunition and weapons on the ship. Americans got on the ship, and along with other people too, and it was attacked and it was sunk as pictured here. This is the Lusitania at the bottom of the ocean right now. Germany defended the sinking Lusitania, claiming it was transporting a large amount of ammunition, and what you see pictured here is it was actually relatively close to shore, shore of Ireland when it was sunk, and all these bodies washed up on shore. People were killed by this when they drowned, when the ship went down. This is a mass grave they're put in. In 1915, Germany sank the Arabic, another British passenger liner, killing 2 Americans. Germany pledges publicly to not sink unarmed ships. The German chancellor at the time pledged that. But in March of 1916, a German U-boat sunk the Sussex, a French ship, and this is what's left of the Sussex. I do need you to understand something. They were attacking passenger ships, they were sinking all the ships they could, but they felt like they were going to lose the war if they didn't stop the trade between America and England. And remember, England controlled the seas because their navy was more powerful. So they were transporting all this material to England to support them from America, and they felt like they needed to stop that. Not justifying the attacking of passenger ships, but that's why they did it. From that was the Sussex Ultimatum. President Wilson states that the U.S. would break diplomatic relations with Germany if German U-boats continued to sink unarmed ships. Germany said it would not sink passenger ships without warning if the United States could persuade the Allies to stop blockading trade to Germany. So Germany says, fine, we won't sink any more ships as long as we can buy stuff from America, food and supplies, so we can continue to wage war. Well, England is not going to allow that. So 1916 was an election year, and most voters favored a policy of neutrality, and Wilson ran on a policy of neutrality. Wilson's campaign slogan was, "He kept us out of war." These are 2 campaign buttons from the 1916 election. So Wilson wins re-election in November of 1916, and in January 1917, in an effort to end the military stalemate in Europe, Germany announced it would wage unrestricted warfare on all ships in the war zone. American, any ship it sees. You come near it, they're going to sink it. And on top of that, there was this thing known as the Zimmerman telegram from Germany to, this is a telegram from Germany to Mexico in January 1917. This is the actual telegram pictured here. And the reason why it's all in numbers is because it was in secret code. Here's what the Zimmerman telegram said. If the U.S. goes to war with Germany, Mexico should attack the U.S. And then Germany would help it reclaim land in the southwest that Mexico had lost to the United States in the U.S.-Mexican War in the 1840s. And that, so the area pictured in light green, if Germany goes to war with America and Mexico invades the United States, when the war is over and Germany has won, they would make sure Mexico gets that land back that they had lost about 60 to 70 years before. Well, that telegram was made public. The British intercepted it and made public and had it published in American newspapers. And on February 1st, when Germany begins unrestricted submarine warfare against all ships in the Atlantic bearing the American flag, both passenger and merchant ships. So now American attitudes really starting to change against Germany. March 1917, Germany sinks 5 American merchant ships, taking goods to England. And on April 2nd, Wilson asked Congress to declare war against Germany. And that's what happened. It's a little complicated story, but it involves attitudes of leaders, of militarism, of forming alliances, of imperialism, of strong nationalism. It involves those attitudes. It involves Austria trying to exert power over Serbia and Austrian leaders getting murdered. It involves war breaking out and America staying neutral but wanting to sell stuff to both sides. But England could control the trade to England and prevent it from going to Germany. So Germany used the weapon it had, which was submarines, to sink all ships, and a lot of passengers, a lot of non-combatants, a lot of not soldiers being killed in this. And it brought us into war in 1917. But look at the date. The war began in August of 1914, and we would not be involved until April of 1917. The war had been going on for a while at that time. And that's the big show on U.S. going to war in World War I.